Hi, welcome everybody. It is the month of October. Welcome to Asian Wander Women. We have our fireside chat today with Anna Lee from the Healing Journey Retreats. I'm really excited to be sitting down with her. This has been a long time coming. We've been planning this for almost a year. Things have popped up on both ends for both of us, so it takes two to tango, and we've managed to make it work out today. So I'm really excited. So I'm just gonna pass the baton over to you, Anna, and let you introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, thanks, Justine. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I'm from Toronto, Canada. Right now, I live in Puerto Rico. I started the business called Healing Journey Retreats, which are mental health retreats focusing on neuroscience and mental wellness. It's been about a year and a half since I've started the business, and yes, I'm really happy to be part of this fireside chat. Justine said it's been a long time coming, so really happy to be here today.
We are very, very happy to have you. So you said you started the business a year and a half ago. How did you get started?
Yeah, so I started this business because I was laid off from my tech job. But before
Relatable,
that,
very relatable.
yeah, but I've always had a dream to start my business, but it was never really encouraged by my family or even by myself. I feel like I never had the courage to take that leap of faith. And so when I got laid off, I thought, oh, the universe is telling me to, do something with my life that is maybe a bit different. So yeah, I used to work in tech, and the layoffs were pretty bad, and jobs were very competitive. And so I thought, okay, what are the things that I can do? So that diagram for Ikigai, it's like, what are you good at? What do you love doing? What can you make money from? And what does the world need? So I thought about all of my experiences, from Airbnb hosting to traveling. Um, I had wanted to start a hostel at one point in my life,
Mhm.
and I thought, okay, but this requires a lot of money. What is some way to make this dream happen without owning or having to rent a commercial space? And I thought, oh, retreats. I could kind of deliver the same experience without having that upfront cost. So that's kind of how I started this business.
And then you and I, since we've spoken off camera before, you had said to prepare for this, you had taken a trip, a 9-month trip to do some like market research at one point, right?
Yeah, so I've taken two sabbaticals in my life, which I feel like I have these, I call them quarter life crises. Too often. The first time I was in my early mid 20s, and I had taken a 11-month trip to, that was just more traveling, backpacking. And then I had another one closer to my 30s, and I had wanted to do this market research trip for hostels. So at the time, I was really enamored with hostels, and I thought it was the best way to meet people, and it's the best way to travel because it's so budget friendly, and you really meet some amazing people. So I went, to Portugal for 3 months, and then Southeast Asia for the rest. It was a 9-month trip, and I went to the world's best hostels, and they were
Is there a
concentrated.
list? How do
Yes,
you
there
know they're
is.
the best?
So, on hostelworld.com, they do this thing called the Oscars, which is Oscars for hostels, and they had a list for, I mean, many years. It's been so many years, and I've been stalking this list. And year over year, you see a lot of, hostels that are concentrated in Lisbon. So that's why I went to Portugal. And there were also some in Southeast Asia, so that I would go stay, and stalk, talk to the managers, talk to the owners, and take a lot of notes. And sometimes I would also try to, do a volunteer exchange, to see if there was anything I could do. For example, I helped translate, from something from Chinese to English for a hostel in Taiwan, and I was able to stay there for a month. So kind of things like this, trying to learn the business, interview the people who are running the business, and really just to see why they were so successful.
And then so you took all this knowledge and then you successfully executed your retreat.
Yeah, so the retreat happened in April, and it had 9 people, and this was the number I was looking for, like under 10. And we spent 7 nights, 8 days in Tulum, Mexico. And so the theme was neuroscience and mental wellness, and it was a huge success. I had never done anything like this, and I had paid for this online course. The first time I bought an online course was one that taught people how to run retreats and run retreats profitably. So I feel like it was, a year of prep, so much research, a lot of marketing and sales, which is something I don't have any experience in. Um, and yeah, I feel like not having any sort of following or influence in my community or the internet, I was just someone who, was working in tech and then transitioned to trying something new. It's not like I was a life coach or, an influencer of some kind that had a lot of clientele already. So I think that was the toughest part, but I was able to I managed to get 9 people to come, and yes, it went perfectly. And everyone who came on the retreat said it was an amazing experience, and I have a lot of amazing testimonials. So it was a huge success.
Oh, okay. So now I'm actually curious. We've never talked about this. What was the demographic of who attended? Like how did they find out about it? Like, why did they want to go?
Yeah, so I would say the demographic was interesting. So I would say most of them were Canadian. This was by accident because on my website there was no indication that I was Canadian,
Hmm.
but just attracted
Unless you were
to
spelling everything with a U.
probably, probably that was probably a very like behavior thing with the words. Yeah, you're right. And then 2 were American. And I would say the age range, I think the youngest was she was in her early 20s. And everyone was women. This was also not, this just kind of came to be. I think a lot of retreat attendees are women so far. I mean, there are also men retreats that are coming about, but and I think I would say it went from early 20s to probably, yeah, early 70s. Yeah, it was about.
Quite the age
And
range. That's so cool.
yeah, it was a wide range, and I really like that. Everybody had different perspectives to share.
Yeah, really diverse. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then, so now that the retreat was a success, you've moved on to the next stage. And let's talk about the next stage.
So the next stage, it's you would think, oh, if it was a huge success, the next stage would be to do another one and to do one every year, and that was my plan. And when I finished the retreat, I was in such a high. I was like, wow, I can do this. I felt super confident. And I was like, I'm gonna do one again in like 6 months or 9 months. And then I went into this like existential crisis. I think it was so I had to do this reconciliation of all the finances, right? So as this is, and as part of the online program that I pay for, you have to kind of look at like how much money you made,
Hmm.
and also reflect on like what were the things that worked out, what were the things that I really enjoyed, and etc. So kind of had to do like a postmortem. And when I looked at my finances, I had earned $2,000, and I was like, okay, yeah, exactly. It takes time to not only break even, right, but to earn a profit. And I was able to do that thanks to the course that I signed up for. But I also at the same time felt like the struggles, the blood, sweat, and tears, the tears um, from the last year to get to $2,000 profit. And like, yes, the testimonials and like the transformed lives. I was thinking, oh, but this is not able to sustain me like as an income or as the only source of income.
Yeah,
So
because that means your annual income was
2000,
$2,000.
which is way less than minimum wage. And I just started freaking out. I thought, oh no, like at this point, it had been, I think, a year and a half or almost 2 years that have been not making any money. You know, I was kind of going through my savings, and I had some savings left over for special projects such as, you know, entrepreneurship. So, but I think it was just kind of this like, oh, I suffered, I suffered. I went through so much struggle, because that's another thing that most people don't talk about is the struggle of being an entrepreneur. We always see the highlight reels and the successes on the internet, and no one really wants to see someone complain about how hard it is to do something. So I just thought the struggles that I had gone through, and a lot of it was personal growth in hindsight, but during it, you're like, this sucks.
Yeah, big
And
time.
so after that, I was like, oh, this $2,000 is really not sustainable. And so I just got to this state where I felt really financially unsafe, and I started to get really anxious, and grocery shopping really stressed me out. You know, it was just like looking at the price, inflation. I was just like, I don't deserve, you know, bread that costs $10 or something. So yeah, I just got into this state where I felt like the pyramid of like Maslow, you know, psychological needs, the basic one for psychological safety, like being able to pay rent and food, I was not, you know, getting that. And so I couldn't go up on that scale to say, oh, I need to be creative and go to the self-actualization part and like, you know, do things for my business and be able to think critically and, you know, move this forward. So I just really felt like in a dark place. Yeah. So then I was like, I can't do this anymore, and I need to fill this basic need first. So then I got a job again.
Hmm.
So that felt like a step backwards. And it still kind of does, because I've only been at this job for 2 months. But at the same time, I was like, I need to do this so that I'm not in survival mode, so that I'm able to build up my confidence and, you know, everything else, so that eventually I can revisit the business and have that flow mindset for the business. Because right, like, for the last few months, I was like, oh no, I can't live like this.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Mm-hmm.
I relate to this idea similarly to if I was in a pickle, I know for a fact that my mom would welcome me home with open arms. But for me, mentally, it's like such a shameful thing it feels like to just like return home after
Mm-hmm.
living independently for so long and being able to live independently. It feels like a step back, even though for a lot of people, I think it's becoming more and more uh, just like common for people
Yeah,
to go home later in life now, just to like
yeah,
go home, save some money, and then,
yeah,
do whatever you need to do. But
yeah,
it's the smart thing to do these days. And if your parents are
yeah,
willing and able to house you, like why not take advantage of that? But I think we've been taught societally that
yeah.
these moves feel like steps back, even though they're not. They're totally not.
For sure. It's like sometimes you just need that break to
Hmm.
have like a little floaty to hang on for just a little bit, so that you can catch your breath and then, you know,
Exactly,
go
and
to the
reset a
next
little
one.
bit. Yeah,
For sure.
yeah. So then, yeah, going back to a corporate job obviously has its pros and its cons. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but your mental health was definitely, I think, impacted both in positive and negative ways going back. I think it's important to highlight that even though it was difficult, it still has brought a lot of positive benefits, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first paycheck I received, or even before I received the paycheck, just knowing that a paycheck was coming, I started buying little things that I had deprived myself of for the last 2 years, because I wasn't making any money, and all the money I had was paying for things like, you know, the domain, and, you know, like for my business and all the things, like all the business expenses for Canva, Zoom, and all the things. And so yeah, when I moved to this new place with my partner and had to furnish our place, you know, it had already come with some furniture, but then there were other things that I was like, oh, like there's a sponge and by the sink, there's some sponges, and then there's, some soap. And I was like, oh, I kind of just wanted like an organizer, a sponge holder, soap holder thing. And I was looking on Amazon, it was like 10, 15, $20. And I was debating for like hours, like, oh, do I really need this? Like, oh, if I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have it, the sponge would just be on the sink. Like it just, and I just felt so pathetic, because I was like, oh, I'm
Mm.
in my late 30s and I had never felt poor. I had, scooped ice cream at Baskin Robbins in high school for minimum wage. And I feel poor now because it didn't matter how much money I was bringing in. I was able to have some money to buy things that were not extravagant, but not even necessities, but like little treats that you wanted to give yourself. And I was not allowing myself to have any of that. And so before the first paycheck came in, I was like, oh, now I can finally buy a sponge holder without thinking about it for hours. And yeah, I think that was a benefit for sure. I think for the other side, I mean, and this applies for any job because there's no perfect job, right? When you have a boss,
Mm-hmm.
when you have to work with other people, and it's not to say this doesn't exist in the entrepreneurial world because even when you're an entrepreneur, you still have to, cater to your clients and maybe
Mm-hmm.
investors and who else. So as long as we're working with humans, there's always going to be some sort of differences. And so I think now I'm more empathetic and understanding towards founders. I used to be in startups a lot, and this job I have is also a startup. And I feel like the founders have so much to do, and I didn't really know how many decisions they have to make, and how much was on their plate, and how much was in their mental headspace at all
Mm-hmm.
times. I became a founder myself, and so when I complain about something, or when I think back on when I used to complain about something, it's like, oh, well, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that you don't know. So there is this reality check that, oh, there is actually a lot going on. And so hopefully I'm more empathetic, but at the same time, sometimes I'm like, oh, why is it like this? And it's like, oh, I guess on the other side, I could do my own business, but that's also tough. So choose
Mm-hmm.
there's
Because
no
yeah,
perfect world. Yeah.
the path of the solopreneur is you have no one to rely on but yourself, right? You have to solve all your problems, you have to bounce all your ideas with off your own head. Like, of course you can consult and get advice from others who have walked similar pathways, but at the end of the day, you are the ultimate decision maker. You have
Yeah.
to, come up with the ideas. It's all on you. And so I can imagine it's same, but not. I just had a friend's wedding I attended recently, and it's just like she had like decision fatigue, right? It's just like making all the
Mm,
decisions all the time. And it was too much. It was too much.
yeah. Exactly. And I'm someone who is very indecisive. So sometimes it makes me question like, oh no, do I have what it takes to be an entrepreneur? Because all the other entrepreneurs I see on social media or in the networking events, they all seem so confident and decisive and know what they want. And so there is this constant comparing and like imposter syndrome even in this realm, like, oh, is this for me? Do I have what it takes? So
Have you ever thought about how someone might be viewing you and thinking the same thing? How they're like, "Wow, how is Anna doing it all? Like she put on this amazing retreat and she's doing it by herself. She's incredible." And they're probably having the same thoughts, right?
yes, I've had people who say these things to me, and I feel like such a fraud, which is sometimes why I try to be more vulnerable and open on my own social media to talk about the struggles because it's really not what it seems. I had so my original vision for Healing Journey Retreats was to work with therapists or other coaches who have a clientele, who have the expertise to be kind of the star in the start, like in the light for the retreat, and I'll be kind of the planner behind the scenes and doing all the logistics. So there was this one therapist that I had met, and she said she's following along my journey on social media, on LinkedIn and Instagram. And she said, oh, well, if Anna's still doing it after all these months, then I must be, then she said, oh, I was motivating her in some way so that she could keep going. And I was like, when she told me this, I was like, oh, you don't know the struggles. And I had used like the social media scheduler so that you can post content, every frequent day or whatever. But it wasn't like, oh, like, let me just post, since I used to post when I felt like it. But then the truth is you don't really feel like it at a consistent
Yeah.
interval. So then I was telling her, oh, that's all just the scheduler doing its job. But yeah, it definitely creates this false reality that all the entrepreneurs are always putting out content that is positive and encouraging and inspiring and motivating, when the reality is not that at all, at least not for me. So,
which I think the truth is it's not that for anybody. It's not that for anybody, but that's just the version we decide to show on social media, right?
for sure.
And you had mentioned you met someone who you follow on socials, who you often just like do little check-ins. You're like checking up on what she's up to and how her business is going. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I had attended a yoga teacher training retreat myself last year or the year before, and I spent about 2 weeks with 10 or so other yoga teacher um, to be. And there's this one person in the retreat, and she's also from Toronto. And when we were introducing ourselves and why we're doing this yoga retreat, I said, oh, I wanted to teach yoga at my own retreat. And she said, oh, I was starting a wellness center, which is a yoga studio, plus doing other things like Tai Chi, meditation, and things like that. And so we were like, oh, like the two entrepreneurs, doing something in the wellness space. And after the retreat, like she started her studio in Toronto downtown, and her business just took off. It just seems like it's doing so well all the time. She has so many students in her class all the time, and then she like upgraded to a newer studio, and she painted it all, it was bigger, and she has all these partnerships with all these big, huge brands. And then she was pregnant, and then she gave birth, and meanwhile, I was just like, oh, why am I struggling so much to get even 9 people to come on my retreat? And so, yeah, I think it was doing me more harm. And I think this has to do with my own perspectives. And I was trying to change my mindset. It's like, oh, there is enough space for everyone. I think there's a lot of scarcity mindset that comes from, so many factors. But it's like if you come from a poor kind of upbringing, you're like, ooh, I must survive, I must have all these things for myself. But there is enough space for everyone. So to change from scarcity to abundance mindset is also something I have to work on. But yeah, it's just but still seeing that she was doing all these successful things while I was struggling so much was something that was, yeah, messing up with my mind a lot, for sure.
Which I think it's an interesting perspective because I don't think people talk about it enough, because I think we all do this. We see someone who's doing something that we would like to do. They have achieved the dream that we would like to achieve. And then I think usually people are posting, I would like to hope that they're posting just to share and also motivate people, usually just to be like, if I can do it, you can do it too. And so, but it's interesting that from our perspective, it can also be from the person viewing it, it can be taken in a light of like, this is actually harming my mental health because I'm now comparing. It's not motivating me, it's actually demotivating me in some ways, right? It's making me feel like, why am I not good enough? And how come I can't achieve these things as quickly as you can? Yeah. Because I remember one of my really good friends started a jewelry business, and she was comparing herself to these big brands that had been around for decades. And I was just like, you need to slow your roll. This is your first year of business. Like, I know that this is, the gold standard for what you would like to achieve, but they've had years and years and years to refine their work and to get themselves to this stage to build up their branding and, learn all the the business, then learn the industry and all that. So you need to give yourself time to figure it out. But I think it's really easy to give advice because you know you're not involved and you're not emotionally involved in it. And then I think if I put myself in her shoes though, I would have done the same thing. I totally would have done the same thing.
Yeah. And there's so much pressure that I think we put ourselves. I think I was always, at least when I was an employee for other companies, I was always the overachiever, trying to do things at 200%, and then realizing that was not sustainable. I think when it came to my business, I had kind of brought that mentality over, and it's like now it's for my own baby. I'm naturally doing everything I can. I'm naturally working longer hours and on weekends, and not thinking about how much I'm working. And so I think also for someone who is very susceptible to burnout, this was also a reminder that I needed to not look at the hustle culture and say, okay, all entrepreneurs have to work 100 hours or more a week and be on this trajectory so that they can get their business off the ground and grow at 2x and then 5x and 10x. I think the mentality from startups, and you have to report to investors and like, oh, the return on your investment is this, and so everything is about profit, everything is about money. And so when it came to my own business, I think I had a hard time finding the balance of how hard and how much I should work on it. I remember seeing this jewelry stand. I was actually in Puerto Rico in 2017. I had visited this island, and it had a sign that says open some days, closed others. And I thought, it's great. It's not like, oh, here's a shop and we have like the opening hours on Google Maps. It's like, if you catch me open today, that's like good for you, right? And I was like, damn, this is like next level. This is next level. So I think there is this extreme of a lifestyle business. Like, oh, do you want it to be a lifestyle business, or do you want to be a profitable or a business? By definition, needs to be profitable in order to be called a business. Otherwise, it would not exist. So I think for me, that was also another balance that I'm still struggling to find. Like, okay, what do I want this to be, and how do I want my mental health to kind of live alongside this journey?
Which, yeah, I think that will be a long journey. Truthfully, I think it's a long journey for everyone, not just for you.
Yeah, and it's gonna look different, I think, for everyone, right? Because some, like my partner, for example, he's been a serial entrepreneur, and he's someone who is able to work 100 hours more per week and never gets burnt out, and he feels motivated and inspired by this momentum. Whereas for me, I know myself. If I work that much, I will burn out and I will get depressed. And so it can't be this like huge surge of energy and then like crash, and then like that's not sustainable. So I need to have something that's more like this, whereas other people are just able to do these. So I think people's energy levels and age, and I mean there's other factors, like do they have someone who's supporting them, right? Or do they have a team? Like there's so many mental loads that is not on someone's mind if they have a lot of savings or have a lot of financial cushion or support from other ways, that they don't need to stress. That's not taking away from their mental resources. So yeah.
This just made me think, do you think if you weren't laid off, you would have tried to pursue this as a side hustle?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always tried to start something on the side, but never started it because I didn't have the mental capacity. I think when I was working for other people, and because they were startup environments, it's very consuming. Whereas I think if it was a corporate job, where it's been around for decades, then it's quite 9 to 5, and you're very kind of shut off at the end of the day. And the pace is not as fast. Whereas I think in startups, I find myself working not only long hours, but at the end of the day, I didn't have any juice left in my brain to think of anything else. And then on the weekend, I'd be so exhausted that all I wanted to do was relax and, not do any sort of, like business thinking and all that
Of
stuff. I
course.
think I didn't have any resources left. Yeah.
And then, so because you find yourself again in a startup environment, are you finding it to be similar this time around?
Yeah, so the reason why I took this job specifically is that it's not as difficult as what I used to do. And so I thought, okay, this is an easier job, and I don't mind the lower pay because I just wanted something that would allow me to have the headspace at the end of the day. And another thing is that the hours of this job is 1 to 9 p.m. So I have slow mornings and I have mornings where I can go, do other things, like they go to yoga, go swim in the pool, whatnot. And hopefully, I think down the road, I will be good enough at my job that it's not something that I need to think about and take so much mental energy to do, so that I can have the headspace to work on the business and revisit the business in the morning. So that's exactly why I chose this business. But now it's been 2 months. I feel like there was a lot of, the onboarding, and it's a startup, so it's kind of all over the place. I haven't had that headspace yet, but hopefully soon. And I do want to revisit the business, and I think it's something. Like, I think when I first got the job, I was like, oh no, I'm like, there was a podcast that it was on when I was working full time on the business, and the podcast name was "And So She Left." And all the guests they had interviewed for the podcast are people who left the corporate world and started their own business. And after this episode aired, I kind of felt like I wasn't, let's promote this, about the fact that I left the corporate world, because it felt like at the time, I was like, oh yeah, like, like, yeah, like, I don't have to go, like, but then I was like, oh no, like, what if one day I have to go back? And, so it's like, oh, when I had to return to a job, I felt like, oh, I have to tuck my tail between my legs. Yeah, I'm back. It's kind of like that, again, shame or embarrassment, that like I didn't leave it. I didn't have enough courage to say, like, oh, leaving the toxic relationship and like find someone better. So I think it's, yeah, like you said, finding the middle ground to have a job and do something as a side hustle. I think this is the safest option, because when you have the financial stability, then you're not putting all your mental eggs in one basket and say, I'm demanding this newborn child, which is my business baby, to be able to sustain my salary to what I was making in tech. Like, that's just crazy. Like, it was just born a year ago. It needs to crawl things before it's running and then like working full time. So I think I was putting so much demand on this business, like, oh, you must give me more than $2,000 profit in return, when it wasn't possible yet. So I think, like, having that pressure, right, to produce money, to have that pressure on like an actual job, is what I'm doing now. So I think it's supposed to, yeah, alleviate that pressure from myself as well when it comes to business.
I like this. Metaphor or analogy you've painted, where your business is your baby and your baby is only 1 year old. And why would you expect a 1 year old to make you money? It makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah.
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 So,
But
okay.
even that analogy took a long time for me. Like, when you're in the midst of it, you don't see how ridiculous that looks like, right? But then later on, I was like, this is not healthy. Why am I being so hard on myself?
Yeah. But I also understand the flip side of when you're in it, in that moment, you need it. You need it to provide you with that money, right? So of course you're hoping for that. You need that money to survive and to live. And so it makes sense that you put a lot of pressure on yourself to achieve that. And then also, I had another thought, but it's escaped me in the moment. But I can see why it would be difficult to separate those two things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think there's just a lot of social media influence of what entrepreneurship looks like. And again, because not many people talk about the struggles of entrepreneurship, that it all seems to be this smooth sailing thing that just you work hard, you hustle, and there are results. And I think for me, when I was doing the hostel research project, and I was doing all this research and hadn't even started because starting a hostel is a whole different ballgame that I know nothing about. I didn't do it, but when I was not complaining, but when I was like sharing, some of the difficulties of what I was finding out from, let's say, the interviews that I was doing with hostel owners and managers, and some other people would say, and a lot of reflections would come from my own, again, like I'm someone who's very susceptible to burnout and like mental health issues. So I feel like when I was sharing that, but in the internet world, it's considered oversharing because no one shares. So when you share, you're like already at a, like, oh, we're talking about this. And so other people would say, wow, you have such a good life. You're traveling and you're doing all this. Like, how come you have so much to complain about? So then it's like, people aren't used to seeing the realness of entrepreneurship. And then so even sometimes when I complain or say to my partner about the how tough entrepreneurship is, and I say, well, like this is what it is, or like other people are doing the same thing, and like you just have to shut up and do the job. And it's like that's tough because not everybody, I can't just shut up and do the job. I need to complain and do the job. I need to vent and do the job. But I think other people are more able to compartmentalize some of these emotions that come up, and then they're just able to, do, like I had even hired like a business coach, and he said he's someone who never watches Netflix, never watches any movies, and he like wakes up at 5 o'clock and goes to the gym, and all he does, and I'm just like, okay, that's not something I relate to or resonate with, so I feel like there is this like normal stream of doing a business, which is probably something close to that, maybe not as extreme. And then there's like these other paths that my therapist tell me, like there are other paths to create a business that is more sustainable. And it's like, yeah, it might take longer, but I want to be sane.
Yes.
To be
yes.
able to actually do a business and not give up because I burned myself out because I try to follow someone else's path.
Yeah. Wow. I can't believe your business coach was just like, these are the steps. Wake up at 5 a.m. Drink your 8 ounces of water, like the stereotypical. That's pretty great. Yeah, because that's not relatable. It's just not realistic for most people. Most people don't have the time, energy, financials to be able to live that kind of life. That's wild. But I was thinking about how you were saying how not a lot of people share their struggles with entrepreneurship. And I think about when I see it, they only share after they've reached success.
Yes.
Right? Once they've reached success, they're like, oh, but I started from the bottom. Don't forget. Don't forget, I struggled to get here. But they've already figured out their business and they're doing great for themselves and it's amazing. But they share after the fact. But I think during, they don't often share.
For sure. Yesterday, I saw a post from the founder of Bloom. They do the, like matcha latte mixes and stuff. And she said they've just turned 7 years old. And then she had all these kind of reflections and was saying like, sharing. Then she was sharing all the difficulties that they've had. But during the journey, I mean, 7 years later, she's sharing all these things. But I think there's another thing that my therapist had said, like, because I think I'm also someone who tends to share and maybe overshare, when you go through something that is very tough, it's like the flesh is open, right? And so when you're sharing, that tone of voice is very like complaining. It can come off as like poor me and like victim mentality. Whereas if you shared it a little bit later, maybe not 7 years later, but let's say you had some months or weeks to mull it over and you've had some growth and reflection from it, then it's like, oh, that wound has healed. And so now you're only sharing that scar rather than like, look at all this bloody thing, you know? And so I think then the tone is also different, and then you're able to bring some new insights rather than just like, my life sucks, everything's bleeding. Like, so
Yeah,
think,
in that moment, it's like so much more
so
elevated,
raw.
your emotions, right? Your
Yeah.
emotions are just so elevated. Yeah. This made me think of something I said to a friend though, because what you're explaining is very similar to another friend of mine. She was saying how she has trouble accepting the fact that her problems are real problems. She is someone who often says like, oh, this is just like a first world problem, or like somebody else must have it worse than me. I shouldn't complain. Like I don't deserve to complain about this thing. And I can only say so much to convince her otherwise. But the advice that I've always said to her is just like, your problems are yours and those are real. They're very real. That's what you're living through. This is your reality and this is your life and these are the problems you have. And that's okay that these are the problems you have, right? Like they're very valid. You don't need to be starving and living on the side of the road to feel like you have problems, right? These are still valid problems that you're going through. But it's very difficult for that to sink in for her. And I can see her point of view, but also just I would love to help her shift that point of view. It's like a very hard thing to shift. But I think that often happens when we are comparing ourselves to others or learning about other people's struggles. When you see those things, it's very, very difficult to get out of that mindset.
For sure. I was talking with a friend about exactly that, and she had gone through some really tough things. And she was saying, oh, I've only gone through a divorce and, a job loss and moving across the world to a different country and trying to figure out what I want in life. And I'm like, okay, only those things. And then she's like, oh, but there are other people who are living in war-torn countries and getting bombed every day. And then I read this book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, and it's written by a therapist. And she talks about, there was one page in the book, and I kind of took a screenshot and like sent it to my friend. And she said, in her career as a therapist, there are so many people that come in, and there are varying degrees of difficulty things, like difficult things that happen in life. For example, something as traumatic as XYZ, and then there are other things like, oh, can you believe my mother-in-law like says this when she comes over? And then she says, if you minimize your problems and say, oh, other people must have it worse than me, and this is a first world problem, then you're not really going through the problem. You're just like minimizing it and then like going around it because you're saying this is not a problem. And so she says, for every problem, no matter how small, you have to go through it. And in order to go through it, you have to first see it as a problem. So I sent this page to my friend, and I was like, you see, the therapist, she talks about this. Yeah, but totally true. Like in the moment, you're like, oh, why am I complaining? Other people have this finish.
Yeah, but complain, and we don't even need to call it complaining. You're just sharing.
Yeah,
And I think there's always gonna be people who like what you're sharing and people who don't like what you're sharing. There's always gonna be there's two sides.
For sure. And if they don't want to read it, then they should just unfollow me. It's like I can't even a bit. You can't. Like there's a whole thing that's like, oh, some like you can be a peach, and some people just don't like peaches. Like some people are allergic to peaches. Nothing you can do. So yeah, for those people that don't like you, like they have the free will to just unfollow or don't read your stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is also interesting because I think that's also a form of follower that you can gain, which is someone who follows
Mm.
you out of either like rage or like
Mm.
because you oh that's so funny. I thought I turned those off. I'm so sorry. But
Okay.
people who yeah, people who follow you because of those like heightened emotions, right? Like they either really
Mm.
love your content, so they find a lot of joy from it, or it enrages them, so they can't wait to see more because they're just
Mm.
addicted to this feeling of that rage. And they're like, what's the next thing this person's going to say or do?
Mm.
Or they're actually motivated by you, but there's like all those different types of followers. So I think it's also interesting that you can evoke this negative emotion and people still are interested to see more.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've seen some posts yesterday. Like, there's a channel that I follow. Some girl, she's uh, showing exercises that help with mobility. And it just like has her whole channel. And then her latest post is saying like, hey, I just want to do a PSA because I have so many comments from people that comment about the length of my shorts or whether or not I wear makeup in my videos. It's like I have all this free content for the world to see, and yet there are all these other judgments that are coming in. So it's like even if you're doing the best job you can do in the world, which is producing content and giving people all these free advice or good knowledge that you're sharing, you're still going to get hate from people. So it's just like a numbers game, and the more followers you get, then the more chance there's going to be haters, and that's just unavoidable.
It is. It is. I'm going to backtrack a little bit before we wrap up our call. The
Mm-hmm.
only thing I think I would like to touch on is just like a little bit more back on mental health and finance and having the mental space for it all. You and I had spoken about how when you are in financial struggle, you spend a lot of mental energy thinking about it. And then you were saying it was taking up so much of your energy that it was hard to juggle the other things that were in your basket as well. And we had talked about how you had some personal things you were going through.
Mm.
Do you want to share a little bit about what else you were juggling?
Yeah, for sure. So to the viewers who are listening, the first time Justine and I had booked this call was in November of last year, and I was pregnant at the time. And then the day that we're supposed to film this, I had a miscarriage. And so this was extremely difficult for me. It was very early on. I think it was about 6 weeks. Um, and so, and I had looked up the statistics, like that, like this is why women don't share pregnancy before their first trimester ends because so many of them, don't come to fruition. And so I think still like that was something that was really difficult for me. And then, so I had wanted to have my business and so have the baby. When I wrote down like my goals for 2024 was have two babies. One is the business baby, and the actual baby would be, like the human. And so I did one of them. So I was like, yay. The other one hasn't happened yet. And since then, it also took me some time to think about how do I, like, do I share this and do I talk about this on my social media, right? Is this like, hey, look at my bleeding wound, when it's so fresh?
Mm,
So I think I had shared it in a very discreet way in one of my social posts. And the people who saw it, then a lot of people started DMing me and said, wow, I also had miscarriages before my baby. And I also had two miscarriages. And I also had fertility issues. And so I think my posts on social media, even when wasn't talking about fertility issues or miscarriages per se, but struggles with health, a lot of people would not comment, but they would DM me and say, I'm so grateful for your post because
mm,
I read it and it made me feel less alone. And so I think for me, I wanted to have these two goals, the two babies, and
hmm
some things in life you can't control, right? And I
Yeah.
and I didn't even think about this. I think again on social media you see someone is pregnant, they share the ultrasound picture, and then they give birth, and then everything's healthy and happy. And I didn't even think there was any alternative path from that. Just get pregnant, give birth, and everybody's happy and healthy.
Mm.
Now I'm confronted with this other path, which is I'm having trouble sustaining pregnancy. So I've had two more miscarriages that didn't last for the first month. And so now I'm having to go through all these lab tests and have to research, and my mind is like, oh my God, IVF is something I know nothing about. And so all these topics are quite overwhelming. And I've connected with women who have been through these journeys or are going through it. And one of them said, oh, I just look at it as a project that I'm managing. There is a budget, there is a timeline, and there are things to do. And so she says, when I put this project that I have to manage into my life, I'm able to, one, like emotionally disconnect a bit more, and two, just able to go through all the steps. And so I feel like, okay, now I have this new project on my plate. And so I don't want the stress of, because that's already very overwhelming. And she says, like, just don't have anything crazy going on. Like, don't have crazy work meetings and travel. Like, don't have anything crazy. Because it will take a lot of mental resources out of you. And when I research things on ChatGPT or make phone calls to these clinics, like, I get very drained, and then have to take a few days to recover from these conversations and then restart. So now I'm like, okay, I used to have three things on my plate. I had a full-time job, I wanted to have a baby, and then I wanted to start my own business if it was side hustling. So that's three things. So now I'm like, okay, I only have two things. Let's remove one of those, because each one of those things are actually quite a lot. And you and I were talking
They
about
are all
living
full-time
life.
jobs.
Yeah. Yes, and even living life, like drink 8 glasses of water a day, exercise, get your 10,000 steps in. All those things are already full-time jobs. So that living life, cooking, cleaning, eating, and full-time job, and starting a side hustle business, and trying to get pregnant when are having issues, right? Like those are like, so that's a lot of things on my plate. So I think I just wanted to remove some things. And so my mom always said, oh, you can start a business when you retire. Like, yes, that is true. Like, maybe I won't wait a few decades, like, but I do want to maybe wait a few months, or at least, until I have this priority, because there are priorities, because one comes with a time limit, the others not so much. That I need to prioritize this for myself. So so I just want to focus on, getting pregnant and be able to sustain a pregnancy in a very healthy, sustainable way, and then have the financial income, and so yeah, right now, unfortunately, the business had to be kind of put on pause. But again, like, we have to make these decisions for ourselves, and it is what it is. You only can control your own path.
Yes, and I think that's the perfect place to wrap. That means the Healing Journey retreats, more to come in the future.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Anna, for sitting down with me today and joining me for this talk. It was so wonderful, so nice to finally have this chat with you. And
Thank you.
we at Asian Wonder Women will look forward to what comes next.
Thank you. Thank you, Justine. Thank you.